Hello, welcome to Where's Your Next on this Friday. I am going live today with some thoughts about what has happened in these last few weeks. As you know, we all have a new administration in power in Washington, D.C. Now, what does that mean for hiring and talent acquisition? It actually could mean quite a bit. Let's walk through what's going on right now. So there was an article that appeared in Wired, and I'm going to share my screen with you all. Give me one moment to get up. Um, so this article appeared um, in actually Wired is the ones who first broke the story. Um, they had a very interesting article called "The Young Inexperienced Engineers Aiding Elon Musk's Government Takeover." Now, interestingly enough, this was quite the scandal. There was a lot of things that happened where this kind of got a lot of attention. So let's talk about this because it's got a lot of interesting things. But this is the group through their journalism. They got right to the heart of this, and they were pretty much explaining what was going on. Now, you may or may not agree with them. I think they come from more of a liberal point of view. I'm um, I'm going to try to keep this agnostic from a political um, focus point of view, but I will talk about a few things that I think are important. So let's get to this, and I'll just want to share this little screen. I want to share this article with all of you real quick. So let's share it with you and show you what I'm talking about. So this interesting article, the young, inexperienced engineers aiding Elon Musk's government takeover. So basically, it was reported, and this was broken earlier this week on February 2nd. So it looks like these guys, what they basically wound up doing is they came in to a place. It started with the Treasury Department, I believe, and so they sent out an email from a server and sent a note to a bunch of about 2 million federal employees got this note, and it says fork in the road, which is very similar to what Musk did when there was the Twitter takeover. So if you followed all that series of events, it's a very similar approach to what happened. Now, what does this mean? So as this started to gain steam, people weren't sure who these folks were. Um, I did some snooping around using my sourcing skills. I was able to figure out where some of these folks were. And so you could see that they had taken down their picture. They had anonymized themselves to some degree, except for a couple of them. But about four of the six engineers that were working in Musk's businesses came over. And so it looks like he recruited from his own businesses within Tesla, SpaceX, and a few other places, and his AI organization X. So or XAI is what's called. Now I'll pull this down so you can see me better, but let's just talk through this. This is a very interesting story. There's a lot here to break down. There's a lot to understand, and so so it's a very interesting phenomenon. So I think my point is that this is going to have some ramifications. So basically, there's been these buyouts that have gone out, and in an environment where it's unionized and there's a lot of the federal workforce, about all 2 million of them, a lot of them have access to, and so there's very specific unions. I don't know if, as Musk did this, if he was really thinking through some of the dynamics of how this would go, but the public sector is very different than the private sector. You can do a lot of things when you're in your own private business, of course. But in the public sector, it's very different. There's hiring practices that, are embedded, and they have these collective bargaining agreements, and it's also the cleared space. So you bring all these things together, you're talking about a hornet's nest of crazy. So as this gains steam, the political forces that be on both sides of the aisle started to get really upset and frustrated with what was happening. And so, if you followed this story, you it was Wired who first broke some of the initial details of who these folks were. It turns out they were very young engineers that had come and decided to take part. One of the folks that is an HR person, I won't name their name, they also got involved, and it was a young recruiter who had actually come in the midst of all this. Now, the irony behind all this is, where do I see these things going? Well, let me throw out a few issues. I shared a post yesterday that I wanted to kind of center you guys on. So let me pull that up now, and I'll share my screen again, and I'll show you a little bit about my post that I put out as I was announcing this. And I'm just going to walk through a few of the topics that decided to highlight that day when I made this announcement on my feed that I was going to do this, and talk through what the ramifications were for hiring and other things, and some predictions as well as some advice for different people, and just different things that I think are important to be aware of. um, so with that said, it's it's really fascinating, honestly. I'm trying to keep up with all this, and it's just been happening so fast and furious, that it's really hard to keep up. And so, as you look at all these things, it just means that it's just a very interesting time. So yesterday I put out this post, which I will share with all of you right now, and we'll walk through some of the issues, because I think this will guide my thoughts on this. And so we'll talk through this with this thing. So now that I've gone through the news a little bit, let's talk through about what do I think, where do I think this is all going, right? And how does this going to play out? Well, so as you can see, I kind of pulled up these issues. I said tomorrow we'll talk about issues on the horizon for talent acquisition and human resources pros, where I think some of these issues, which will likely wind up in the Supreme Court due to DOGE, executive orders, and federal hiring practices, may be headed. These issues will likely affect hiring practices for a while, because the feds dictate hiring cycle trends due to Fed contracts, which again filters to those businesses that do business with the federal government. So what does this all mean? So there's been a lot of trends. I mean, we've got AI in the workforce, we've got data privacy, we've got hiring practices, such as DEI, that were with us for a while. Now it seems like DEI is, um, well, I'll predict there what I think is going to happen with that: belonging, culture, social media usage, all of these things. So immigration even will be affected. So where is this all going? Well, here's my opinion. So I'll start with AI in the workforce. Some of these Doge guys are actually using AI to, um, do a lot of the work and the spidering of analyzing all these, these things. So they're basically going line by line through federal contracts and a wide variety of different things. So they were given access to the Treasury. Again, you can argue of the ethics of all of this. I'm not going to go there, but I'm just going to give you some of the background of what they're likely doing. So they're going through these federal contracts line by line, these different expenditures, if you will, and trying to find where the efficiency is, where the government can cut waste and fraud and spending. Now, it seems like a noble goal. However, I would argue that the way they did this was probably a little bit too much of a tornado, and probably is going to come back and bite them in the end of the day. And I do believe that's going to be the case. Now, for that reason, and the reason I say all this, as I look at some of these topics, so AI in the workplace, that just kind of goes to what is going to happen. How will AI, what kind of cases might go to the Supreme Court and then dictate hiring practices that are used with AI. So you just watch. That's going to be an argument that comes to the Supreme Court. I'm predicting that now. So there's that one. The next one I think is going to have some effect is the relationship of unions and collective bargaining in the workplace for workers. And that's going to get looked at, and that's going to go to the Supreme Court. So those are actually the folks who started filing some of these lawsuits to get some of the transparency, and to have a little bit more of the guardrails going. So if you know our Constitution, there's a check on powers. So the other thing that's coming up, I listened to a constitutional law attorney just yesterday in preparation for this, and so I'm going to talk about a little bit about what they said. Basically, their concern is that some of the executive orders are essentially legislation in the workplace from the executive branch, but it's the legislative branch or the Congress that creates the laws, and then it's the duty of the executive branch to enforce the laws. So what does that mean? So these executive orders that are coming down, historically the executive orders have been used as a means to set procedure, within the executive branch. Now, specifically, DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those practices, the hullabaloo around that basically comes down to the fact that people believe that that is an arcane, almost rebranded form of affirmative action. That's the essence of it. Okay. Now, in several cases, I believe affirmative action has been struck down. Now, what does this all mean? Well, the federal government's saying, the folks that the powers that be, essentially Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation is what is dictating all these things that are happening. Go look at it. Just check it out. You'll see what I'm talking about. I'm not going to argue the merits of if it's wrong or right. I'm not going there right now. But you can see the essence if you've read it. You can see a lot of the essence of all these things, and it's the Heritage Foundation little blueprint that's behind all this. So with that, I predict. Here's my next prediction. Again, I'm not going to say, do I think that from my point of view, DE&I has merit. Okay, when it's not tied to a quota, when it's not tied to a checking a box, that's where the bad things start to come. That I think are the issue, perhaps that is going to be argued. Now, do we, ever since the George Floyd days, do we think that this is something that needs to be done? Absolutely, we need to make it better, and there's been a history of challenges. So that's what in our modern era. The reality is George Floyd did not start DE&I. It had actually, so the from an HR perspective, that existed before. People were doing that already, and companies were doing that already to have equal employment. That's really what it comes down to. That's the goal. And so, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act still protects. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects against sex or discrimination based on sex, religion, any protected characteristic, really. And states have set their own guidelines on to what protected characteristics there are, and that also goes down to the level of you're talking about the LGBTQ issues. And so as you've seen some of these executive orders that also apply to those. Here's what's going to happen. So the hiring practices that relate to all these things, federal government and the contracts right now, those, if you look at it, all these companies are now scurrying to change their websites, their hiring practices, all these different things, because this has happened. So do I believe that this is a good or a bad thing? Well, I think that this is a dialogue that we need to have. We need to talk about hiring practices across the board. And it's going to be healthy for the country to go through this, in the sense that reviewing the why behind how we hire human beings, regardless of background, and how we limit our efforts to minimize bias of any kind. So, you're going to see a lot more of the tool sets within sourcing, for example, which sourcing is the finding and engaging talent before the needs arise. Really, what's going to happen there? It's just so a lot more blind sourcing. In other words, there's you'll see Seek Out and Hire Easy and some of these sourcing tools that are out there, even Dice and some of these other ones. There's going to be offerings from the technology vendors that affect sourcing that are going to try to make it more blind. I believe that's going to be a thing, and I think that's going to become more of a thing. So how's that going to even work? Well, you're going to be able to justify these things. And so I think that dialogue of data and this is the other thing that comes up when these engineers went in from DOGE in looking at the federal government treasury data system. That has all the payments of our tax information and private personal identification information. Scary, slippery slope there. So cybersecurity and data protection is going to become a huge issue. Watch, this will be a bigger thing than ever before. That's going to go all the way up to Supreme Court, and we're going to be having a dialogue about protecting people's data. That's going to be another trend. You'll see that, I promise you. Um, so the other thing that's coming up, return to office. What's happening here? A lot of roles were remote for a long time. Do I think remote work is going to stay? Yes, I do think it's going to be staying with us. But now the federal workforce is coming back to the office. Are you going to see more hybrid work across the board? Will it become more standardized where there'll be hybrid work in a wide variety of ways? Yes, absolutely. That's going to be something that's going to be a thing. So that's going to be another trend that's a net result of this federal return to work stuff. More hybrid scenarios across the board for everybody. And I think DE and I is going to evolve. Okay, so it's going to go from this diversity, equity, inclusion label to other titles. So how will that affect there's a lot of affinity groups within organizations, and the constitutional lawyer that I was listening to said you can have those, you can still do that, you can still have that approach, but you need to make it available to everybody regardless of background. So if they want to join and they're not necessarily, so you can have those groups, but they have to be inclusive, and you're going to have to be able to prove that and show that on paper. So really, when it comes to your hiring practices, what in the world am I getting at with all of this? There's just going to be a lot of things coming, you guys. I think that it's very important to talk about this, and you need to be prepared as an HR professional. And really, just, I mean, if you're not certified as an HR professional right now, I would highly encourage you to keep an eye on SHRM. Join SHRM, because these issues, even as a recruiter, become more and more important. And they're going to talk about AI. They'll address all these things. They'll talk about how do you keep your focus on humanity and doing the right thing by people. Merit-based hiring is going to become a thing. Skills-based hiring will become even more important. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all shakes out. Do I think that there will be an existence of DE and I in some way, shape, or form? I think so. I do think so. I think that the courts are going to emphasize the importance of what's known as the equal protection clause. Okay. If you look at the Constitution, there's going to be a lot of that. So, that's going to affect hiring practices across the board. I'm not no labor attorney. I'm just predicting, and this is what I'm saying. I think that this dialogue around hiring practices in general is a very healthy conversation that I want to happen. Okay. I want more people to be able to take part in jobs they're qualified for and open the door to that. So any dialogue that gets us going in that direction, I'm all for. However, I do not think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater now that we have all these executive orders. Here's why. You'll see some of these organizations. You've already seen it from Google. You've seen it from Facebook. They're essentially saying they're scaling back on their DE and I. You will see a statement of some kind about equal employment. You'll still see that. I think in some way, shape, or form, though, the DE and I model of how it's been done will change. Now, how is that going to look? I think that organizations are going to have to be able to prove and back up their hiring practices. They're going to have sound dialogue within to determine what the reasoning is for why they hire the way they do. This has always been a thing. It's not going anywhere, but you're going to have to justify it better. You're going to have to say, well, this is the reason why, and this is clear. Your hiring practices must get clear. And the problem is that it's just, there's been some organizations that are loosey goosey. Hopefully, this will help organizations get better at having a dialogue around these things. Now, do I think, going away from DE and I is something we should be doing? No, I don't. I do think that we need to get back to the heart of the why behind it. Because, having a workforce that generally looks and feels like your workforce or your customer base is good practice. Okay. And so there, it shouldn't be, um, we shouldn't be worried necessarily about how we I think we need to get back to the reasoning of why the criteria exists, and how that, and the why behind it. Really being able to say, well, this is what's necessary to do a job well, and the why behind it. Job descriptions are going to still be important. You're going to have to justify what you're doing on your job descriptions. It's always been a thing. It's always been best practice to make sure you have a realistic job description that's not, you know, vague. And so I think that's a big piece of it, and I do feel we need to make it so that there's an opportunity to have these dialogues with our hiring managers. And now, what, as a job seeker, what are you going to do with all this? What I would be doing is watching how the Supreme Court shakes down. So keep an eye on how things are going to play out, because basically where I'm going with all this is I believe that there's going to be some changes. And I think that some of the laws may be updated, but the interpretation of how hiring practices happen and what is good and what is not is going to have a further dialogue. So, do I think we need to do everything in our power to enable different communities to have more success in the hiring process? Absolutely, I do think we need to do that, and I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. Unfortunately, uh, what a lot of the other, or when these organizations were doing it, we're putting out these DE and I practices, or emphasizing them more after George Floyd. The problem was, were they doing it to check a box, or were they doing it to be human? They were doing it to check a box. So the unfortunate thing is that this is not the way it had to happen. I think, unfortunately, the way things society is going right now, we go in cycles where things, I think, again, this will come to the forefront eventually, where we'll need to have a dialogue again about what we can do to make our businesses better and make them more human. That's really what the goal is. And there's a term I'm going to see, I think we'll see more of: belonging. Period. I love calling any effort in to make a hiring process more human about belonging. And when I say belonging, why are you there in that organization in the first place? Does it match your values? Does it fit your culture? Does it, all those things? But you're just not doing it because, people say they give lip service to our people are our best asset. Yeah, yeah. Make me cringe when I hear it. And the reason is because we need to have this dialogue about humanity again. The reason we're doing the hiring in the first place. What is our purpose of hiring, right? So, no matter what you're doing, I would encourage you, as a business professional, as a careerist, you know, do everything in your power, open doors for people, be a good networker, help people out, just do things for the right reasons. These business practices need to be done for the right reasons. That's it. That's my goal. I think that that's how it should be. What other trends do I see happening? Well, um, I think that, let's talk about social media for a minute. How is social media going to be, an employment branding going to be affected by what's happening? So, I think that we're in a place where employment branding is going to become more and more important. You're going to have to show your employees and the reason they're doing what they do in your workplace, and your values being lived in serving the community and getting back to the community and things like that. I think that's going to be a key factor. Businesses, in order to stand out, are going to have to do more to, be at the forefront of their communities. That's a huge emphasis right there. So, in the dichotomy of things changing, DE and I being one example of something that's going to evolve as a result of what's going on, getting back to the roots of your core business, which is the humanity of it all, and CEOs that are out there amongst their people, serving with them. The servant leader mindset is going to become even more important now. So, again, where do I see all this going? I see a lot of things that are going to be shaking out in the next few weeks. Collective bargaining, like I said, is going to change. You're going to see a lot of moving parts on all these different factors. DE and I will evolve into a more belonging is going to be the word you'll hear more of. I think you'll hear more about AI in the workplace. I think you'll hear more about you're going to have to evaluate your and justify your hiring practice more. Even the way you assess people will have to be looked at. So let's just put it this way: with the changing of the times and the seasons and the different new uh, points of view coming forward, the changes in administration, as an employer, you got to be careful. You got to do the right thing. Do right by people always. That's where I'm going with this. Humanity is the key to the whole thing, and don't just give lip service to it. Do it for the right reasons, for the very essence of the why. Now, as a career person, I would suggest that you're keeping an eye on your career path and being prepared ahead of the curve before the needs arise. So, for example, find the industry you really are passionate about and your why. Why do you want to work in that industry? What is your purpose in working for a specific company? Does it align with your values? Does the company, align to where you wish to be? That's the point, right? So here at Where's Your Next, I just want to equip you to be prepared to see things in a different way. That's all. I just think that we need to think out of the box now. uh, with changes, the way that you might have done things in the past, you have to think a different way. With AI coming, with the changes in DE and I, with again, I do think that there'll still be some element of DE and I don't think it's going away necessarily, and it shouldn't. There's a lot of when companies invest in their people for the right reasons, things happen. The perspective on how it may be done may change, but it's not, so a lot of these things will be dictated by these steps that the president has taken, for good or bad. But the reason we have these things, and the reason um, we have three branches of government that check each other, is for this very reason. So there's a dialogue between them. So our founders were pretty smart. They knew what they were doing. They put things in place the right way for the right reasons. And so when I was listening to this constitutional attorney, she basically said, you know, the executive branch is doing stuff that the legislative branch should be doing. So I think that's going to check itself out. So keep an eye on those things. Those are little trends I see coming. My other thing that I think is going to be kind of at the forefront as well, um, social media. You'll have to keep an eye on Blue Sky emerging, you know, because of when X was taken over. Do I see Blue Sky growing? I do. Do I see Facebook growing a little bit more in influence? I do. It's always been that way. LinkedIn's going to play a role, still be there. My point of view is that professional associations will become more important as well for niche roles. And just keeping an eye on how those things are going to play out. So a lot of these niche um, openings, professional associations are going to come to the forefront more and more, uh, because out of necessity, those niche areas. Now, technology is going to keep evolving. It'll keep changing. AI is going to be kind of at the forefront of things. What I recommend for sure as a career person right now, if you go back to my 25 tips I gave you just recently. You can go back and watch that on my feed. We were talking about, you know, really being ahead of the curve with AI. Become a good prompt engineer, know what you're talking about, have a good basis of understanding for all these things, right? So that's where things are probably headed. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Um, I'd love to get a labor law attorney on, talk some of this stuff. What folks can do to prepare, um, how HR people can be ahead of the curve. Just again, it's all about the humanity at the end of the day. The other thing that's going to kind of come to the forefront, last 4 years have been crazy. There's going to be a lot more mental health issues in the workplace to kind of keep an eye on. Watch for that. It's going to be an interesting year, so keep an eye out. I think as everything happens, I think everything's going to work out. But At the end of the day, really, the if I had any one message at the end of this whole thing for those that are in hiring, focus on the humanity of it all. For people that are preparing for their careers, know your core message, know your why. Research those organizations that have a connection to your values. Make sure you're doing the right thing for the right reasons. That's really it, right? I mean, when it comes to being ethical, that's a big thing, and I think there's a more of a dialogue to come on hiring practices and where they're headed and the issues surrounding it with the new administration. Of course, I think we're going to see a lot more of interesting moments along the way. But I did give you some of my trends and my thoughts where they're going today. That's the purpose of this. I was watching all this happen and I was thinking to myself, well, it's going to affect recruiting on the back end, and there's going to be a lot of things to look at. So interesting issues coming our way. If you'd like to be on my show, the Talent Vlogcast, would love to have you. Anyone is welcome. Would love to talk issues with you. Um, that's it for Where's Your Next today. So I would just, at the end of the day, lots of things going to be evolving here. That's just how it goes, as it should be. Things need to keep evolving. So should we. If there's any one thing, any one final message I'd give you to have courage in these times. When change comes, we all get, very, we get nervous. We get a little bit scared of what's happening. We're not sure where it's going. There's a little bit of uncertainty there. Whenever there's uncertainty, there's, people get nervous about how things are going to go. At the end of the day, regardless of where we are or what's happening, keep your eye on your why and your purpose within you. That's the most important thing you could ever have. If there's any advice I'd give you, it's always be human. I have some good friends. One I'll call out right now. Her name's Katrina Collier. I'll say, hey, she always would say, be human. I love it. And I've never forgotten that in all my years. So from me to you on this Friday, I hope things go well for you. Hopefully, you're having a good year so far. Keep your head up no matter what you're going through. Remember, you are important no matter what you're doing. From me to you on this Friday, Mike out. Peace. Thanks for being here with me. Some of these thoughts today. We'll see you soon. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend, everybody. Mike out.